Nobody begged you to put on your bugles or your gold badge. Nobody pleaded with you to lead them. You wanted the new bars, the new helmet, and to be the boss. You said, "Follow me, I will lead you." You committed to more than collecting a pay raise. You are now in debt to everyone below you in rank. You owe them, and you owe their families. You said, "I will do more. I will know more." You said, "I'm the person best suited to bring you home every shift." That means you committed to doing more than just showing up for work. It means you committed to being a lifelong learner. It means you committed to doing extra things that aren't always fun, aren't always glamorous, and are sure as hell things you don't always want to do. Just remember, nobody begged you. You're an officer.
Hey, what's up everyone? This is Ryan from Young Officers on Fire, and gonna hit up another 10-minute training series. I think this one may actually be close to 10 minutes, only 10 slides, so we'll see if we can get it there or around there. So on the docket today is 2-inch hose, the best kept secret in suppression in my opinion. Yes, I am a truck guy, but I teach a little hose. I love our package that we've created at my department, and I'm a big fan of the 2-inch hose. So this is going to be a cursory review. If you want the deep dive into it, then you better get out and listen to Dennis Laguerre, because that's the guy you need to listen to about hose stuff. But if you're not familiar with 2-inch, what it's about, this will be a brief summary of I think its place in the fire service. So here we go. So considerations for attack line selection. Commercial versus residential is a huge one, right? We need to think differently in commercial buildings than we do in residential. And we all know that there's been a long list of fatalities that have happened because people were bringing residential flows into commercial buildings. So that's critical. It's huge. Fire size versus flow, GPM versus BTU. We'll break that down a little bit. What does that mean to us? And then attack mobility. Can we, function this line? And is attack mobility the same in residential as commercial? Again, it's not. We know that the layout of a house is way different than the layout of a strip mall building or a box store or something like that. So commercial versus residential. So commercial needs. We need big water. We need 250 plus GPM. So NFPA 1710 requires us to be at 500 GPM. So I put down 250, though I think for a minimum, I'm kind of a fan of the 300, which we'll talk about. So flow and reach is huge. We need to use our stream reach and actually get that GPM or GPS, gallons per second, as we'll talk about at the end, to the seat of the fire from a distance. Very critical in commercial application. And then friction loss capable of extended stretches. So this is something we don't talk a lot about, but it's really important when we're talking about 2-inch versus 2.5 inch. And that's one of the things we need to be considering is, can we stretch 600 feet and still have pump pressures that are reasonable, because we've not applied a hose that has too much friction loss. So, and then even extending off that with 1 3/4. So residential, we're looking at mobility being far more important, being able to move through a house, lots of corners, being able to move quick and aggressively. So weight of the hose and nozzle pressure are extremely critical. Flow, again, GPM versus BTU, which we'll break down in just a second. Kink protection is huge, something that a lot of people don't talk about or understand. If we underflow certain tips and certain nozzles, then we start having a lot of kink problems, and that just reduces our flow to a dangerous place. And then again, our minimum flow is 150 on residential per the NFPA. That's 300 total for 2 lines. So I've heard, and I feel like I've read it maybe, but I don't know where it is, but I've heard a million times that the second line has to be equal or bigger than the first. I can't find anything that supports that data. That's not in the NFPA. So if you know that there's a source for that, please add it to the comments and let me know, because I feel like I've read it, but it might just be knowledge that's passed down that was not actually an NFPA or a WAC or something like that. So anyways, GPM versus BTU. What does this mean on the fire ground? So we hear that a lot, but how do we actually apply that? How do we know that our GPMs are actually the right amount to absorb the BTUs? So the NFA formula is pretty standard. It's a consensus formula was created, so it doesn't necessarily exactly equate that 1 gallon of water absorbs 10,000 BTUs. It's not exactly like that, but we know that it works, and it aligns with the NFPA requirements. So it's length times width divided by 3 gives us our GPM. So two of the qualifiers that people kind of tend to forget that are important is that there's less than 50% involvement in the room, and that's critical because once we go outside these two parameters, the other one being an ordinary vent profile, is that the NFA is no longer applicable. So that doesn't mean that 150 GPM isn't necessarily going to work, but it means that the NFA is no longer exactly an effective formula for it. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a sec as well. So length times width is the room size, and then 50% involvement being our max. And then ventilation profile. So something that we don't talk enough about, maybe I think, in the fire service is we know ventilation has been a hot topic as far as vertical, horizontal, flow pass, all those things, but vent profile is huge, and that's something we should be sizing up as we're doing our 360. So if we're figuring a typical room is 10 by 20, so a 200 square foot room, that means that a 20 square feet is going to be 10%. That's ordinary ventilation, which just so happens to be that a 3.0 door, 7 feet tall, call it about 20 square feet, 21 square feet, if it was 3 feet wide, that's 10%. So if your only vent point is an intake and exhaust through a door, you have ordinary ventilation. If you lose that window and you have a 20 square foot intake and now call it a 15 square foot exhaust, you're moving into accelerated fire growth. So that's important to know, especially if the room is large, because it might be outside your flow capabilities. So when I was in recruit school, the great Chief Ralph Omled, who was a numbers maniac, guru, savant, he would always ask, he said he asked every fireman he ever met how much fire they could put out. And most of them never could answer. And so I don't want you, if you ever meet Chief Omled, to not have an answer. So here it is. So we take the NFA and we flip it in reverse, just like any other math equation, and we multiply the known gallons per minute times 3. So if you have on your truck, whatever, a smoothbore, combi, doesn't matter. If you know that when you set your pump at this pump pressure with this friction loss, I know I'm getting 150, I know I'm getting 160, I know I'm getting 180, whatever it is, multiply that 3 by 3, and that tells us how much fire we can actually fight with the NFA formula. So if we take the standard 7/8 smoothbore or typical flow from an auto nozzle, realistic flow is 150 to 160 GPM. Multiply that by 3, that gives us 450 square feet of involvement of a 900 square foot room. Again, that 50%. So what does that mean to us in a residence? It means that we're looking at a 2-room fire or a large space being at the max capability of an 1 3/4, 150, 160 GPM nozzle. So if you're flowing 185, it gives you a little bit more. But again, when we talk about the nozzle pressure, mobility, Kyle Romegas, another, again, savant on this stuff, far more knowledgeable than I am, but he talks about, you yeah, it's great to have more gallons, but if you're shutting down because the pressure is too hot, there's too much nozzle pressure, or you can't move forward, you can't flow and move, then you're actually moving less water. So having 185 GPM, a 15/16 smooth bore that you're shutting down, or you're running at 3/4 bale, is not better than 150 GPM that's wide open that you're flowing and moving. So again, just understanding those things are real critical when selecting. So how do we attack a 3-room fire or a large space with greater than 10% ventilation profile? So do we jump up to that 2.5-inch hose, which is what the majority of American Fire Service has as the next option? Obviously, we could bring in another 1 3/4 line and attack it with 2 lines, but are we going to move up to that 2.5-inch hose? So 2.5-inch hose, 50 feet, is 120 pounds full of water. Flowing 265 to 330 GPM in a manageable range. Obviously, we know we can get a lot more out of them with master streams and stuff. But poor maneuverability in a residential, we know moving 2.5 is just a bear. It absolutely can be done, but when you're going around corners, upstairs, into bedrooms, that's a lot of problems with a 2.5. So. And then if we under pump it so we can manage the line better, then we start having kink problems when we start pumping it at 40 PSI to the tip. So things to think about. So this is where I think 2-inch is fantastic. And we implemented it about 5 years ago in our organization. We did an entire hose and nozzle package study, which is happening more and more in the fire service. It's awesome because you need to see what your trucks can flow with what hose and what nozzle, the full attack package, as Dennis Laguerre talks about. And you have to see it and do it yourself. And the days of a chief officer who really doesn't understand flow and mobility, nozzle size, friction loss, all those things, selecting hose size and spec layout, I hope is a dying dinosaur because it has no place in the fire service. And we had a ton of value from doing a hose and nozzle study in our organization. One of the things that we implemented was 2-inch hose. So again, when I say 2-inch, we run Key hose combat ready, which is actually closer to 2 1/4. So when you hear Dennis Laguerre talk about 2 1/4 true ID, it's pretty close to what we're talking about. So, and we'll talk about that with the tip size. But again, if you want to have the in-depth knowledge, you need to research Dennis Laguerre, look at his stuff. There's a reason why people pay him money to come out and do their nozzles, and I'm a truck guy. So again, this is a very cursory understanding of the 2-inch and how it works. So anyways, 2 tips for this. So a 1 1/16, if you're familiar with the Freeman ratio, basically what it says is that the nozzle size, the tip size, should be no greater than half the size of the hose. So again, it's not actually 2-inch, it's more like 2 1/4, which is why we can get to 1 1/16 or 1 1/8. So we went with the 1 1/8 because that gives us 260, 265 GPM at 50 PSI at the tip, which is putting us in the capability of 2.5 with the mobility of 2-inch. So 50 feet of 2-inch actually only weighs about 10 to 15 pounds more than an 1 3/4. So it is substantially lighter than the 110 pound 2.5-inch hose. So it's still maneuverable. Nozzle reaction is about 99 pounds. So it's easily controllable by one firefighter. It's flowing that large amount of water, that volume, so low kink properties, not a lot of problems with kink with this hose. And again, the weight and NR is from Captain P. Farnell, who wrote an article about 2-inch and Firehouse. Excuse me, the weight is from, the nozzle reaction is all from Elkhart. So, like everything, 2-inch has its limitations. So it's a high friction loss hose because you're moving 2.5-inch water through a smaller size hose. So you get about the same as an 1 3/4 line, 20 PSI per 50 feet. So for me, that's a little low on commercial flow numbers. And there's several reasons why I don't believe 2-inch is a commercial line. It's a large residential fire line for us. So I like 300 as a starting number for commercial flow. There's no master stream capabilities. You can't hook it up to a ram and get 500 gallons. That doesn't work. The friction loss is too high. You're limited at the extended attack length. So again, with that 20 psi per section, you're looking at 80 psi per a 200-foot stretch, which is what we have, 200-foot pre-connects. You are limited in trunk or extended attack capabilities because of that friction loss. So with a 2.5, you can go in with 300 gallons, knock the fire down, on a 600-foot stretch, and have half of the friction loss than you're getting with a 2-inch, and then you can extend off that with a leader line, and it's very functional. It is the commercial line. And I don't want to confuse that. The 2.5-inch is the commercial line. 2-inch has, in my opinion, no place in the commercial realm, but it is a great attack package for a large residential fire. So, by the numbers, again, just comparing kind of the gamut here, but basically, so 1 3/4, we're getting 160 gallons per minute. The nozzle reaction is 60 pounds. It weighs 50 pounds. It's very manageable. 50 feet of reach. So as Chief Isaacson likes to talk about, gallons per second. How many gallons in a second are we getting? Because that's really what we're talking about here is gallons per second. So, and then friction loss, 17 to 20, depending on your hose. All those things have massive impacts on friction loss and flow. So some departments do 15/16, and again, I'm talking smoothbore. We have 50 psi, 160 fixed gallonage combi nozzles from Elkhart. They're good nozzles. This is definitely not a 10-minute trading on combi versus smoothbore, but there's limitations with going to the 15/16 or with a higher flow combi. So you increase your nozzle reaction to 70. Which is still maneuverable. There's no doubt about it, but it's less. It's more challenge with flowing and moving. So the weight is the same, the reach is the same. You're getting a few more gallons per second, and but your friction loss is increasing trying to shove that much water through an 1 3/4 line. So your nozzles, your TFTs that say they're 200 GPMs. Unless you're pumping them at over 200 psi as a pump discharge pressure, you're not getting 200 out of them, and they're very unmanageable. So know what you're actually getting. When we tested ours with the pump numbers that our pump operators were pumping, we were getting between 90 and 110 gallons out of our TFTs at the manageable pump pressure that we were pressing. And those were 100 psi. They make other ones, but those were 100 psi nozzles. So 2-inch. So 2-inch, we're getting 265 GPM out of the 1 1/8. I really like the 1 1/8. I think it's an awesome tip. Again, 99 pounds. It's manageable. You're not flowing and moving like an 1 3/4. You can watch Aaron Fields. He'll flow and move 300 gallons. I don't have that skill set, mostly because I'm a dumb truck guy, but a little harder with that 100 pounds coming back at you of nozzle reaction. Weight though is 65 pounds, which you can see is almost half of what you get out of a 2.5-inch. Reach, it reaches the same, 75 feet, about gallons per second. We're up to 4.3. Again, high friction loss, so about 20. So then we step up to the 2.5, 1 3/16. Again, they make a 1 1/8 tip on 2.5 that flows the same 265. The tip size always is going to flow the same gallons per minute, but it still has that heavy weight. So that's why I like, and our engines are spec'd, that we go from 160 to 265 to a 1 3/16 at 305 out of our 2.5. So 110 pounds of nozzle reaction, which you can manage with one person. You're not going to flow and move it, but you can manage it with one person. If you can't, go take a brush class, go take a fields class, and you'll learn how. It is absolutely doable. But its weight is heavy, so 120 pounds, 75 feet of reach, 5 gallons per second, and again, half of the friction loss. So when we're talking long stretches, extended attacks, this is the hose. This is the commercial. This is the king of hose. And then obviously putting on a master stream, we can get 500 pounds out of a mini master stream, an Elkhart Ram. So 2.5 is the commercial line for me all day long, but it's really about having options. So having that 2-inch in between for me is really the quintessential. If you want to read an awesome article, read Brian Brush's article on Exponential Engine. To me, the one missing piece is that 2-inch line, and that gives us a good high flow residential attack package. Especially if you got McMansions and places like that, you want to flow inside. 2-inch is just, to me, the ideal hose. So another resource, Brass Tacks and Hard Facts. If you haven't seen this, they have a ton of videos on there about the differences between commies and smoothbores and flows and which tips and why. This is Jeff Shoup, again, 10,000 times the knowledge I have. He's got some good videos on here. They look at some different tips. I'm more of a fan of the 1 1/8. I've never got a chance to ask him, if he has a preference or why the 1 1/16 versus 1 1/8. But they compare basically the 265 GPM attack packages in 2-inch and 2.5. The two different hose lines with the same tip. So anyways, that's an awesome resource, and that's all I have. I think we're barely over 10 minutes, so I'm pretty happy with that. Please comment anything that you think I said wrong or have wrong facts. Please comment. It's the only way I learn stuff is feedback on, sometimes I make shit up, and sometimes I was passed on bad information that just got passed on for generations. So please, if you see something that you disagree with, post about it. Let's have a good conversation about it, some good dialogue. So that's pretty much all I got. Stay aggressive, and we'll see you guys in the next one.